Hello again. Welcome back to the month of October, arguably my favorite time of the year. Now, I know Christmas, at least for me, is kind of nice because I get to gather with my family and get some free shit every now and then. But October is just... the month is pretty devoted to the theme of my favorite movie genre, horror. And to start out my October reviews, I thought I'd go back to a horror classic. The 1931 version of Dracula starring Bela Lugosi. I love classic movies as well as semi-modern movies. And last year when I did my mini reviews of the Universal Monster Classics, I talked about just how much I adore Dracula and the other movies, Frankenstein, the Wolfman. But if I had to choose a favorite of the Universal Monster Classics, it would definitely be Bela Lugosi's Dracula. While it wouldn't really shock people today or stimulate people today, I still really love this movie. I saw it when I was about 10 years old, maybe 11. And the VHS box set that I got that had this, Frankenstein the Wolfman, it was a gift from a teacher back in elementary. I don't remember her name but I know that she knew that I love movies, old movies, and it was something that another person had lying around their desk, and whoever that was gave it to her and she gave it to me. And I got a lot of sentiment for this videotape. But still, as we all know, tapes will not last forever, so I do have it on DVD, along with the other classic monster series. And the original Dracula is... I know I've said this for many movies, but it is one of those films that really is a landmark in where movies were and how they were progressing in a way. The original Dracula, I don't know if I'd necessarily say it was scary, but it definitely, even for me today, has some genuinely creepy moments. And any actual tension or fear that emits from this movie is owed to Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi as Count Dracula was definitely his greatest role. He never really lived up to the amazing success he had with the original Dracula portrayal, and we all know how he eventually wound up with Ed Wood. And the Dracula character has a lot of layers to him. I wouldn't necessarily call the character complex, but I would say he has layers. The character, when you come down to it, is evil. And then he's particularly evil in this version. There aren't really any scenes that show he has any human qualities. Funny for a vampire, but yeah. Right from the get-go, when we're introduced to Dracula, we have a bit of eeriness to him and some tension. All stem from the fact that in his first few scenes, we don't know what he is going to do or really what he is capable of. And he has a very calm demeanor about him. Very calm and cool, but at the same time, we're nervous because we know that Dracula is one of the most famous monsters, so he could do something shocking any moment, something horrifying any moment. And the 1931 film, a very interesting thing about it is there is virtually no music in this film. I mean, there's no scoring really at all. The only time we ever hear a music score is during the opening credits and the end title card. There is a scene that takes place at an opera, and the music there well, I guess you could say is scoring, since it's something that's happening in the film as a performance. Doesn't technically count as a score. And other than those three parts of the film, no music. In a few scenes, I guess some people would argue they think that takes away tension. But for me, it's still there. It still works magnificently. And it all once again comes to the way Bela Lugosi portrays Dracula. In the scenes where he is threatening, Lugosi still keeps his calm voice, but there's an intensity to it. And the way he contorts his face, the expressions he makes, whether it be out of anger, lust, or sick joy, there's just a great sense of sensuality to him. I hope I'm making sense. I'm trying to find words for it that would probably be better suited to a much more artsy critic. But I love the original Dracula so much. It's a classic, and I've been a huge Bela Lugosi fan since, I was very little. My mom was, as I've mentioned before, a little overprotective when it came to the movies I saw, so I really enamored myself in a lot of the more classic films. Dracula, Frankenstein, The Wolfman, The Mummy, The Invisible Man, the Abbott and Costello movies. As you know from my review last year, I love Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. And before I get to the plot of the movie, I just want to give credit to the people who made it. Dracula was directed by Todd Browning, who directed many silent horror films with the great horror legend Lon Chaney Sr. Not Lon Chaney Jr., his father. Maybe it's a little dumb to make that distinction, but you say Lon Chaney, and most people today at least are more familiar with Junior. And a very hard thing to do with the crew credits for Dracula, because back in the 1930s, movies didn't really give credit to the crew people. But a very hard thing to do with this movie is find the right credit for who wrote the movie. Anybody who's a fan of Dracula or vampires, really, will know that the novel that the film was based on was written by Bram Stoker. But the screenplay is hard to figure out. The movie doesn't have a screenplay credit. The only credits it really has are to Hamilton Dean and John L. Balderston, who wrote the play that apparently the movie was semi-adapted from. And on IMDb it lists the uncredited writing for Louis Bromfield, Todd Browning, Max Cohen, Dudley Murphy, and Louis Stevens. And the producing credits go to, once again, Todd Browning and Carl Laemmle Jr., who produced quite a few of the original monster classics, including The Mummy and Frankenstein. Ecto-cooler. 'Tis the season, I guess. And when I talk about the plot, the storyline of each Dracula movie is they all pretty stay to the same storyline, but there's, as always with different adaptations, different versions. And the way this film opens is we see this man named Renfield, played by a regular for the original monster movies, Dwight Frye, in probably his most sympathetic character role. Renfield is a real estate agent, I think, who comes to Transylvania to give Dracula the final papers and lease for this castle he's bought in England. And he arrives at a village, and all the villagers are very superstitious, very religious and superstitious, want to get home before dark, saying it is the night of evil. And all the people in this village react with wide-eyed fear the moment he says he is going to Count Dracula's castle. And he doesn't believe any of it, and says he's not afraid. And when Renfield and Dracula meet, it is just beautiful. The way it's shot, the execution, the delivery of lines from Bela Lugosi, saying, "I bid you welcome. Listen to them, the children of the night. What music they make." And then we get this scene of Renfield giving Dracula the papers. All the while there's this tense atmosphere going on. And Bela Lugosi, the first frame in which he appears, which is before Renfield arrives at the castle, is just perfectly chilling. Bela Lugosi has this amazing stare. The way he stares, it's just unnerving, but also, and this may seem odd given that this is what Lugosi looked like, but his stare, next to being very intimidating, very scary, is honestly pretty sexy. And Lugosi, he has a lot of great sex appeal in this movie. He says all these lines with his Hungarian accent, and he adds a lot of charm to them. Even in the scenes where he's being evil, and there's a lot of those, he is still very sensual. And I think that's an important thing to bring up. The 1931 Dracula film is, for its time, a very sensual film. Almost every delivery of line from every character in this film feels very arousing. Everyone speaks with a very low and soft voice. The way everyone speaks is just almost breathtaking. And Bela Lugosi just brings it home. His Dracula is evil, has pretty much no sympathetic qualities, and everything he does is mostly out of lust. After meeting with Renfield and giving his haunting but seductive stare, and Renfield, I guess the best way you could describe Renfield is he is a very tragic character. He's an innocent man that comes in just doing his job, and Dracula doesn't care. He just takes Renfield as one of his many slaves. He bites him and makes him obedient to him. And after that, Renfield just becomes one of the most insane but enjoyable characters you will ever see. Dwight Frye is just great in the scenes after Renfield becomes a servant of Dracula. The character is now very disheveled looking. He is very... he's just sad. He's lost pretty much all free will, and he has to do whatever Dracula says. And Dwight portrays Renfield throughout the rest of the film as being very wide-eyed, and he's, in most of his scenes, smiling, wildly going, Master! Master! But at the same time, there are some scenes that show that Renfield still has part of his humanity left, but he has no choice as far as what he can do. And these scenes involve him crying and begging for help. Once again, it's just tragic with the Renfield character. I feel legitimately sorry for him, even though he does some awful stuff near the middle part of the film. But he does have some funny moments. There's a great scene where... There are many great scenes where Renfield is just looking around people, or when he's just going an extra step crazy, and he's like... That laugh, you have to watch the movie and actually hear the laugh. That laugh is fucking great. It's just... So it's both funny but genuinely creepy. It's just unnerving, just how the camera will focus on him, and you see his full eyes as he stares right at you going... An interesting fact. The scene where Dracula attacks and bites Renfield, the studio didn't want that scene in the film. Why? As they put it, they thought the scene had a gay subtext. And they said in a memo to the director, Dracula only attacks women. 1930s, people. And I do agree, Dracula and Renfield, their early scenes do have a very seductive feel to them. But at the same time, that's just Dracula taking in another victim. And my opinion, put simply, is male or female, blood is blood to Dracula. And all the scenes where Dracula gives his hypnotic stare, almost all of these scenes have the screen go almost completely dark except around Bela Lugosi's eyes. And even when there's light in the scene, his eyes have a glow to them. And it's very effective looking. Even though the effect to make it was simple, just point to like light pointers at Bela Lugosi's eyes. Simple, but it works. And after the opening scenes with Renfield, Dracula goes to England, and I will admit, as much as I love this movie, there are some, especially screenwriting flaws to it, storytelling flaws, in the sense that we don't really understand what Dracula's motivation is for what he's doing. My opinion, based on what is presented in the film, all Dracula wants to do, I guess, is move to another country and feast off of the living's blood. And also to spread the curse of being a vampire to as many people as possible. Essentially, that is all he does through the film. And while it may come off as a sort of weak motivation for doing what he does, for this film, and especially from its period, I feel it works just fine. And while he's in London, he particularly goes after this woman named Mina Seward, played by Helen Chandler. The Mina character is the daughter of a man named Dr. Seward, played by Herbert Bunston. And the Dr. Seward character is the chief doctor of a mental institution. I don't know exactly what to call someone who runs a mental institution, but that is what he does. And Mina's his daughter, and she dates this man named John Harker, played by David Manners, who was also the main boyfriend character in The Mummy with Boris Karloff. In fact, this movie has a lot of connections to The Mummy. Dracula's arch nemesis in virtually every film made with the character, Van Helsing, is played by the great Edward Van Sloan, who was in The Mummy as the main enemy of The Mummy. And he was also in Frankenstein, where he didn't really fight the monster, but he was Dr. Frankenstein's mentor, and he tries to help him stop the monster when he starts going amok. And yeah, Mina, I guess she's the traditional female character of these type of movies at the time. Not too complex, but has enough qualities where she's not a hunk of wood. She's kind of a damsel character, but it never goes too bad to the point where I'm like, fucking hell. No, she's just right. And it fits the story well, and Edward Van Sloan as Van Helsing, next to Bela Lugosi and Dwight Frye, Edward Van Sloan is the best actor in the original Dracula. He is just great. He is cool, collected, but he is also, for the 1930s, a badass. He is not afraid of Dracula. And he makes that clear in the scene where they face off after Dracula's true identity has been revealed. Van Helsing says that he will do whatever it takes to destroy him. And during this conversation, the two of them don't really raise their voices. They stand about this length apart, and well, they say that they'll do whatever it takes to stop the other. There's a sense of respect in a way between them. You get the feeling that they respect each other. And I like it when a hero and a villain have those type of scenes. It's not what you expect when it comes to the idea of good fighting evil. And during this scene, Dracula tries to pull Van Helsing in under his influence and powers, and Van Helsing just stands there with a face that says, "I ain't afraid of you, motherfucker." Dracula tries harder, and Van Helsing starts to come towards him. And you think Dracula will get him, but Van Helsing is able to regain his strength and pull back. And once again, showing that what I think is respect, Dracula says, "Your will is strong, Van Helsing." This is probably one of the first, I guess you could call it, badass scenes in movies. And it is also my favorite scene in the original Dracula. I can feel the tension, and I root for Van Helsing, and even after I've seen it so many times, I just never get tired of it. Going back to Mina, she's nice. She's obviously not someone who thinks too hard about life. And I don't know exactly why Dracula is drawn to her. Maybe it's because she's beautiful, because I'll admit, Helen Chandler, for a 1930s woman, is pretty nice looking. And eventually Dracula does get to her. And I'm a little confused when it comes to vampires and their rules. Like, the rules of vampires and movies change depending on the film. And here it's implied that even though people like Renfield and Mina get bitten, there's still a chance that they can have some of their humanity. And also that it's possible to maybe save them. In a scene with Van Helsing and Dracula, Dracula says that if she dies by day, her soul could be saved. But if she dies by night, she will become a vampire. It's a little confusing, but I think if you look at it hard enough, you can understand what they're trying to say. And the character of John Harker, Mina's boyfriend, in the other versions of Dracula, it is usually John Harker who is the one that goes to visit Dracula at the beginning and give him the lease to his new place. But here they went with Renfield. And John Harker, for this film, I would have to say he's the weakest character. He's not awful. David Manners doesn't do a terrible job, but the character's just not that interesting when you come down to it. His only real character traits are he loves Mina, and he says he wants to do all he can for her, but he rarely takes the suggestions of others seriously. Like, he's very set in what he thinks is right for her. Guess you could call it the traditional chauvinist character. But once again, David Manners does a good job, and I guess the character's just a little too wooden. But not as bad as some wooden characters. Riker. But yeah, and David Manners, I don't know if he hated this character, but I read that he did not ever watch Dracula, not once in his life. He lived to be in his late 90s, 67 years after the movie was made, and he claimed up to his death that he had never seen it and he had no desire to see it. I can't figure it out. But I think the best scene with Mina is when she is under Dracula's influence and she's with John, and he's just so gullible when it comes to her. He will follow her if she says she loves him. And while talking with him, she suddenly freezes and stares at him. And this is a great scene. This whole film it is, for me personally, the original Dracula sends the best sort of chills and shivers down my spine. You get that great sensual feeling in your neck when you watch it. This scene with her where she's just staring at John, the camera zooms in slowly on her, and she just has these very intentful eyes, and he is off screen saying, "Your eyes, they look so peculiar." And then she slowly leans out of frame, and you get the feeling she's going to try and bite him. The way that shot is set up and established with the slow moving and her slowly leaning out of the frame, it's just a great chilling scene. And I know I'm saying the words chilling and sensual a lot, but that is the best way to describe the feelings I get from the original Dracula. It had a lot of stuff that, while not that impressive today, probably pushed a few buttons back then. Just the sense of characters touching each other in very intimate ways, especially along the necklines. The way Dracula is very predatory, especially with the female characters, and remember, Renfield. Dracula is a very sensual character, if not a consensual character. But you almost forget the fact that Dracula's attacks are just what they are, attacks, because of the way Bela Lugosi portrays him during those scenes. With his stare, with his body movements, his voice, they're just great. And there's a scene where a flower girl, played by Anita Harder, I think this was her only film, but I like this scene enough I gotta mention her name. She's a girl selling flowers on the street, and Dracula comes up to her. She's about to give him a flower, and she just gets lost in his eyes, in his hypnotic stare. And as a bisexual, I just think, if I was in her place, I think the same thing would happen to me. And when he takes her, it is not too disturbing, but if you try to think hard about what he could have done to her that wasn't shown, it could be considered disturbing. But the way Bela Lugosi does it, I think at the time a lot of people were like, sure, I'm gonna die, but what a way to go out. Just, I mean, that may sound awful, but Bela Lugosi, he is just so damn charismatic and... Sorry, I'm getting lost. And fun fact that probably goes well with the way I was just acting. At the time of the original Dracula's release, Bela Lugosi got a ton of fan letters from women. In fact, he got more fan letters at the time than even Clark Gable. And that really had to have said something, because as I admitted, Bela Lugosi's not the traditional sexy man, but it's definitely in the personality. And the other characters in this film, before I forget, Dr. Seward, he's not too complex, but he's definitely better than John Harker. He's Mina's father, he runs a mental institution, and you can tell he takes his job very seriously, tries to figure out what's best, especially for a movie that takes place possibly in the late 1800s. I have to say, for a psychiatrist or psychologist from that time period, he seems surprisingly genuine. And we all know just how bad psychiatry and psychology was not that long ago. And he definitely loves his daughter. He's a little overprotective, but in a good way. The kind of overprotectiveness that makes sense, and you definitely agree with him. Like John Harker, he wants to take Mina away, completely ignoring the warnings of Van Helsing. And Dr. Seward, like, both Harker and Seward don't believe in vampires at first, and they have a hard time warming up to Van Helsing's theories. But after showing them enough facts over time, he's able to convince them. And Dr. Seward, he is more quick to believe than John Harker. And he says to John, who wants to take Mina away, despite Van Helsing's warnings that it would lead to Mina's inevitable death, Dr. Seward says to John, being firm but reasonable, I know you love her, but she's my daughter, and I want to do what's right for her, what's best. So he's a loving, caring dad as well, and I wouldn't know about loving, caring dads, but a parent who cares is always a good thing. And the other characters who I feel are worth mentioning are Lucy, another character who's appeared in the several adaptations of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Lucy is like Mina's best friend, who's more experienced in like sex than she is, and is more, I guess the term is wild. The scene where Mina, John, and Lucy first meet Dracula, Lucy shows that she has an apparent fascination with death, reciting some poetry about death. And before Dracula even goes after Mina, he is originally drawn to Lucy, and as I said, I don't really understand Dracula's extreme fascination with Mina, but his initial draw to Lucy, I definitely get. He's attracted to her love of dark things and her apparent fascination with death. Which makes me think that she seems like the better fit in a way. And Lucy, like so many, she is attracted to Dracula. And both her and Mina have a scene before Lucy eventually gets the bite, where they talk about Mina's being more of she's being a friendly bitch about it, but she's joking about Dracula's weird ways of being charming. But Lucy genuinely likes him. And I wish more had been done with Lucy in this film. After she's bitten, she dies, but she comes back. And showing how this film was daring for its time period, there's a scene where we see Lucy, now as a vampire, walking about at night. And these scenes, we hear the sound of little kids crying. And the next day, we see people reading about this particular incident in the newspapers. And what they read is some children were lured into the park by a beautiful woman with the promise of chocolate. Sounds similar to anything that may occur in real life. And yeah, I just find the similarities between her luring the kids and child molestation to be very interesting and dark. Like, she doesn't rape them, but it is still a very predatory attack. And the fact that it's a woman, I like that part. Shows that women can be just as dangerous as male attackers. And for a film from the 1930s, I think that's daring very much. The last character, who is, I guess, a major character who's worth mentioning, is Martin. Martin is a nurse at this mental hospital, and he's the comic relief of this movie. And he is funny. He's Renfield's main caregiver, and whenever he takes Renfield to see Dr. Seward or Van Helsing, or just anything he's in, he talks about Renfield by going, and he has this very whiny, high-pitched voice, and he says, he listens to the wolves at night as they howl. He thinks they're talking to him. He's crazy! He does that in virtually every fucking scene he's in, going, he's crazy. They're all crazy. He is funny. He is funny, but at the same time, and I'm not gonna take it too seriously, but there's one thing I hate. It's caregivers for the mentally ill who are irresponsible or bad, just fucking flat out bad at their jobs. This character is funny, but I feel like it's a shame nothing bad ever fucking happened to him. You have to see the film to get what kind of a douchebag this character is. And you just think, what an asshole. And he calls Renfield crazy with him right in the room. This may sound awful, but this is a character who you kind of hope would either get brutally killed or raped at some point. I don't care how bad that sounds. Martin is he is a shit caregiver. And that is all the main players. The only other person I'm going to mention is this character from the very first scene, which is a bunch of people, including Renfield and a coach. She's just a passenger, but it's this woman who's reading from a book. She has the first line in the film, and this character, who only has like a minute, less than a minute even, of screen time, is played by Carl Laemmle Jr.'s daughter, Clara Laemmle. I should probably clarify how to spell that last name. Laemmle. She died about 2 years ago. And until she died, she was the last surviving cast member of the original Dracula. She was 104 years old when she died. That's a good big age to go. I don't have a ton more to say about the original Dracula other than, on a scale of 1 to 10, I give this classic film 7.8 out of 10. It's great. It has a few flaws as far as its storytelling and production quality goes, but it's a simple, well-done classic horror film that, as far as suggesting dark content and having sexuality, was pretty pushing for its time. There are two last things I want to bring up. Number one is, there was a Spanish language version of Dracula made at the exact same time as the English version. Not just at the same time. The Spanish language version was shot on the exact same sets as this movie. The Spanish version is actually on this DVD set, and I've seen it, and it's good, but I don't like it as much as the English version. Maybe it's because I don't understand a fucking word. Well, I know what C means, but I don't know a ton of Spanish. And the actor who plays Dracula in the Spanish version, he does not have the amazing charisma and seductiveness of Bela Lugosi. But it was still cool to find out it was made at the exact same time. And next to being on the same sets, like from what I read, the English language version was shot during the daytime. The Spanish version was shot at night. So yeah, it was back to back. And I just think that's pretty fucking cool. And the last thing I will mention, the biggest flaw that Dracula has is its ending is very anticlimactic. Dracula has taken Mina, Van Helsing and John Harker go after him into his castle. Daylight comes, They go in, Dracula's in his coffin, but he didn't get Mina in there in time. So they find her, save her, and Dracula is, while he's asleep, has a stake rammed right through his heart. It's too simple and too easy. And the way it ends, I agree, the ending is just abrupt. But I guess it could be salvaged by the fact that the ending has kind of a cliffhanger quality to it. And there was a sequel to this, Dracula's Daughter. I haven't seen it in many years, but I remember it being, at the time, I felt like it was okay. But yeah, the ending's definitely anticlimactic, but it doesn't ruin it for me. This movie, I still, to this day, love it a lot. Regardless of whatever flaws it has, 7.8 out of 10, motherfuckers. And the last thing I'll leave you with is, when Bela Lugosi died in 1956, he was buried in his Dracula cape. Badass, man. Badass. Well, that was my first horror film review of October 2016, and there's more on the way. Until next time, my movie niggas and my film fags.